Imagine a fortune in gold, vanished at the moment of a nation's death. Not just any death, but a collapse so total it erased a currency, a government, and a way of life in a matter of weeks. This treasure has haunted the American imagination for over a century and a half, fueling dreams, financing expeditions, and spawning legends so persistent they feel like inherited memory. But what if the most compelling truth about this lost fortune is not where it went, but why we are so determined, generation after generation, to believe it ever existed in the first place? This is not merely a treasure hunt. It is a financial ghost story, a profound tale that reveals the chaotic death of an entire economy, the brutal birth of a new capitalist age, and the deep human need to fill the void of a catastrophic loss with the shimmering, durable substance of myth. It is a story about what we value, and how that value can transform from metal to paper to pure, powerful belief. Our story begins, as all great financial mysteries should, not with a chest of gold, but with a ledger. A line of numbers that tells an unambiguous truth. The Confederate States of America died bankrupt. This is the inescapable economic reality, the foundation upon which every ghost story is later built. From its very inception, the Confederacy constructed its economy on a fragile foundation of belief in a single commodity, cotton. Its grand strategy, dubbed King Cotton Diplomacy, was a psychological and economic gamble of monumental proportions, a case study in misunderstanding the mechanics of global trade. The premise, held with almost religious fervor by the planter aristocracy, was that the industrial engines of Europe, particularly the sprawling textile mills of Great Britain and France, were so utterly dependent on Southern cotton that these powers would have no choice but to recognize the Confederacy, break the Union blockade, and provide crucial loans and diplomatic support. It was a theory that confused a vital commodity with irreplaceable diplomatic leverage. It failed to account for existing European stockpiles, alternative sources like Egypt and India, and the powerful moral and political force of the abolitionist movement abroad. While the South waited for a foreign salvation that would never come, it had to fund a massive war. Lacking the sophisticated financial institutions of the North, the Richmond government turned to the simplest, most dangerous tool, the printing press. It authorized the issuance of paper currency with reckless abandon, eventually putting over $1.5 billion Confederate dollars into circulation. The result was a textbook, devastating spiral of hyperinflation. The psychology behind this is critical. As the war fortunes shifted, confidence in the grayback notes evaporated. A Confederate dollar was worth less than 5 cents in gold by early 1865. Prices became absurd. A mundane purchase required bundles of cash. This paper money transformed from a medium of exchange into a daily, tangible reminder of a fading cause. In this sea of worthless paper, the concept of hard, metallic gold took on an almost mystical quality. It was the ultimate tangible asset, the physical embodiment of real, unchanging value in a world where the very idea of value was evaporating. The psychological need for this symbol was as powerful as the economic need for it. A government and a people facing existential threat exhibit predictable behaviors, denial of the inevitable, desperate improvisation, and a hoarding mentality, clinging to the last solid, reliable things left. We see this pattern not just in Richmond, but in the final days of countless regimes. We can picture the Roman emperors, fleeing a crumbling Rome with wagons laden with imperial gold and jewels, trying to preserve the material essence of their power. We can see the Nazis in the spring of 1945, systematically hiding looted art and bullion in mines and lakes across Germany as their Reich collapsed, an attempt to seed a future resurgence. These are echoes of the same deep impulse to convert failing political capital into hidden, tangible wealth. Yet, in stark, illuminating contrast to the chaotic, faith-based Confederate system, the Union economy, orchestrated by figures like Secretary Salmon P. Chase, was a lesson in emerging modern financial machinery. It leveraged legislation like the National Banking Acts to create a stable currency network, marketed war bonds directly to a mass public through patriotic appeals, and maintained a robust, if burdensome, system of taxation. The South built an economy on aristocratic pride and a single crop. The North built one on institutions, broad participation, and diversified industry. This contrast is crucial. It sets the stage not just for a military defeat, but for the total disintegration of an entire monetary system and the collective trust that underpinned it. By the spring of 1865, the faith had run out. The currency was trash, the armies were retreating, and the dream was dying. On April 2nd, as General Ulysses S. Grant's forces finally breached the Petersburg defenses, the telegraph wires to Richmond sang with panic. The order was given to evacuate the capital. The city descended into chaos. Government officials, clerks, soldiers, and civilians scrambled to flee the advancing blue columns. Warehouses of tobacco and cotton were set ablaze to prevent their capture, the flames quickly spreading to engulf entire blocks. Amidst this apocalyptic scene, a train was prepared at the Danville station. It would carry the fleeing Confederate cabinet, essential state archives, and according to the legend that would blossom like a poisonous flower in the years to come, the remaining material wealth of the nation. But what was actually in the treasury vaults beneath the Custom House as the flames lit the night sky? The official records, where they survived the fires and the chaos, paint a surprisingly sparse and disorderly picture. Years of a draining war had emptied the specie reserve. What remained was not a unified gleaming hoard, but a patchwork assembly of last-ditch assets. Perhaps some gold bullion and coin from the Richmond Bank's deposits that had been forcibly loaned to the government earlier in the war. A shrinking quantity of Mexican silver dollars used for international transactions, miscellaneous gold, and jewelry donated by patriotic women in a wave of enthusiasm during the war's early hopeful days, and other scattered valuables. It was a hodgepodge, a disconnected collection of a failing state's final assets, a far cry from the fabled, neatly stacked millions of coin and bullion of popular imagination. This discrepancy presents us with the first and most crucial mystery box. If the official reserves were so modest, so clearly depleted, where did the potent legend of vast, hidden millions originate? The train, steaming and anxious, pulls out of the burning capital, carrying not just a few heavy boxes of treasure and desperate men in a fading gray, but the fragile, nascent ghost of a nation's imagined worth. It was heading south, into the narrowing corridor of a dying cause, and into the thick fog of history where fact ends and story begins. What followed the train's departure was not a carefully executed heist, but a protracted dissolution, a slow-motion unraveling of authority, accountability, and collective purpose. As the Confederate government migrated south, first to Danville, Virginia, and then fragmenting further into Carolina, its civil power melted away like the spring snow. In this deepening fog of defeat, the clear line between official action and personal survival became porous, almost invisible. The remaining assets in those wooden boxes were no longer the sovereign wealth of a state, but a portable source of ultimate survival in a collapsing world. Gold, in this immediate post-collapse landscape, was the only universally accepted currency, the one thing that could buy food, passage, or mercy, triggering a frenzy of primal need and opportunistic predation. Human behavior in such a vacuum of authority follows a predictable, ancient pattern documented in every fallen empire. The powerful every man for himself, instinct battles with residual loyalty and a sense of duty. The moral landscape turns gray. Was a harried, exhausted paymaster using a sack of gold coins to buy bread and meat for a band of starving, retreating soldiers an act of noble duty or criminal misappropriation? Was a local sheriff or mayor who took physical possession of a box of silver for safekeeping from the fleeing officials acting as a faithful civic custodian, or a future profiteer securing his own post-war fortune? This profound moral ambiguity is the fertile ground where legends take root and grow wild. We can trace this chaos through specific, documented incidents that are like footprints in the mud after a storm, pointing in contradictory directions. A boxcar containing several thousand Mexican silver dollars was abandoned near Greensboro, North Carolina, its contents later partially recovered by astonished Union troops. Naval paymaster funds were scattered or seized in the chaotic fall of Charleston. Key actors like the beleaguered treasurer Edward C. Elmore, a man trained in law and finance, now presiding over the death of a treasury, or Captain William Parker and his dedicated young naval cadets were suddenly the unwilling custodians of a disintegrating legacy. They were making split-second decisions with no rulebook, no higher authority to appeal to, and the enemy closing in on all sides. The final, poignant act of the official treasury was the so-called Danville disbursement. In those tense days in the small Virginia town, officials attempted to pay soldiers and government clerks with the last of the collapsing paper scrip. It was a sad, almost ceremonial gesture, less a financial transaction than a ritual acknowledgement of the end, a symbolic settling of accounts that everyone in the room knew were already spiritually and materially unpayable. The critical question thus subtly shifts from the simplistic, where was it hidden, to a more revealing and complex one. Was this ever a coordinated, strategic concealment, or simply a managed, chaotic dissolution? The war ends with the iconic surrender at Appomattox Courthouse. And as the Union Army advances to occupy the shattered South, it wears two hats, that of the victor imposing a new order, and that of the stern auditor seeking restitution and a final accounting. The chaotic, desperate flight of assets gives way to a systematic, paper-driven federal investigation. Treasury agents fanned out, interviewing people, checking ledgers, following rumors. And into the widening gap between the chaotic reality and the dry, incomplete official inquiry, something else quietly begins to grow. It is a seedling of narrative, watered by a potent mixture of grief, nostalgia, economic desperation, and raw greed. That seedling would, over the next 50 years, grow into a great, twisting tree of myth, its branches reaching into every corner of the post-war culture. The vacuum left by verifiable facts was filled by powerful cultural and economic forces that converged in the decades after the war, creating a perfect ecosystem for a ghost. The post-war South was a psychological and economic landscape tailor-made for such a specter. The carefully cultivated philosophy of the lost cause took root, a collective coping mechanism that reframed a military defeat as a moral and spiritual stand against overwhelming, soulless industrial might. It was a narrative of nobility, emphasizing gallant generals like Lee, faithful enslaved people, a grotesque fiction, and a noble agrarian way of life, crushed by the impersonal northern machine. Within this romantic, mournful framework, a hidden, untouched treasury became the perfect financial metaphor. It suggested that the heart of the Confederacy, its valor, its purity, its true worth, had not been vanquished or discredited, merely withdrawn from view, preserved in a pristine state. It was a seed of future redemption, a tangible promise that the cause's essence remained uncorrupted by defeat and waiting, like Arthur in Avalon, for a time of need. This powerful psychological need for a symbol of enduring value dovetailed perfectly with the raw, unfettered economic frenzy of the Gilded Age unfolding across the reunited nation. This was an era of spectacular speculation, of dubious get-rich-quick schemes from the Black Hills gold rush to wildcat oil drilling to the corrupt manipulations of Wall Street robber barons. It was a time of a pervasive cultural belief that vast fortunes were waiting just beyond the next gamble, the next stock tip, the next land claim. The treasure hunt for Confederate gold fit this national ethos perfectly. It became a legitimate, if quixotic, cottage industry. It democratized the dream of sudden wealth in a particularly American way. You didn't need a railroad charter from Congress or vast capital to build a Carnegie steel mill. You needed a shovel, a dubious map, bought from a mysterious drifter, a head full of whispered stories, and unwavering, almost religious faith. It was the ultimate speculative venture, where the core asset was literally unseen, unproven, and existed primarily in the realm of story, making it, in a strange way, limitless. The primary engine for propagating and monetizing these legends was the explosive, competitive growth of the newspaper industry. In an age of fierce circulation wars and the rise of yellow journalism, stories of hidden Confederate gold were guaranteed sellers, perfect for grabbing headlines and thrilling readers. They often followed a reliable sensational formula, a mysterious, aged informant, often a former Confederate soldier broken by life or a dying penitent seeking absolution, would whisper an incredible secret to an eager reporter or a gullible treasure seeker in a dusty room. The details were always crafted to be just specific enough to feel tantalizingly plausible. A certain lightning-struck oak tree with a unique knot 3 paces from a creek bend, a particular depth near a specific rock formation in a lake, a cipher carved into a fireplace stone, yet just vague enough to be irrefutable and to require further investment of time and money to explore. The locations chosen were never random. They were places of deep historical or emotional resonance for the intended audience. A lonely rural church that had survived the war, a deep dark lake that felt primordial, a forgotten well on an old plantation heavy with memory, an overgrown family cemetery where ancestors lay. These sites felt like places where secrets could naturally belong, where the past was buried. One of the most enduring and location-anchored tales centers on Washington, Georgia, the small, unassuming town where Jefferson Davis held the final, scattered cabinet meetings of the Confederacy after the flight from Richmond. Here, legend steadfastly claims the last of the treasury, often specifically cited as over $100,000 in gold coin and silver bullion, was entrusted to a loyal local guardian, sometimes named as a sympathetic banker or a former official. The story holds that it was hidden in the modest vault of the Church of St. Cajetan, or perhaps buried in the town cemetery under a specific, unmarked spot. The power of this story lies precisely in its tether to truth. The fleeing government was indeed there, in palpable disarray, and its graceful leap from that fact into the void of what might have happened next, attaching the national mystery to a real, quiet, visitable place you can stand in today. Another, more itinerant and cinematic legend took root far from the southern heartland, in the forests and along the shores of the Great Lakes region. This elaborate, novel-ready story tells of a covert operation, orchestrated by Confederate spies or sympathizers, to move a significant portion of the treasury north through a secret network of safe houses, aiming to reach Canada. The goal was to purchase weapons from British interests or fund a government in exile. According to the ever-evolving tale, this clandestine shipment was discovered by vigilant Union detectives or savvy counter-spies who executed a dramatic train heist somewhere in Indiana or Michigan, subsequently dumping the heavy, incriminating metal into the deep, cold depths of Lake Michigan or one of the other Great Lakes to hide the evidence forever. This myth is fascinating for its cross-geographical reach, pulling the Confederate ghost far beyond its expected haunt into the industrial North, illustrating how the story could mutate, adapt, and find purchase in new audiences with different landscapes to imagine secrets within. Then there are the broader, darker conspiracy frameworks, like those that later wove in the Knights of the Golden Circle, a real but massively exaggerated secret of Southern society. In post-war lore, this shadowy brotherhood was invoked as the disciplined, eternal custodians of the treasure, suggesting the gold was not lost through chaos and incompetence, but was strategically, ritualistically hidden by a sworn cabal for a future resurgence of Southern principles. This taps into a deeper, timeless human psychology, the powerful, often comforting attraction to conspiracy, the belief that apparent chaos and misfortune are actually part of a secret higher order, and that great historical events are controlled by hidden, powerful hands working behind the curtain of everyday life. It transforms a story of loss and failure into one of purposeful, patient, strategic waiting. The actual economics of actively chasing this ghost are a revealing, self-contained case study in the monetization of hope and the psychology of investment. For the vast majority of seekers, the tangible treasure was not the recovered gold, but the act of seeking itself, the lifestyle of the hunt. Hope became the primary, circulating currency within this subculture. Men and sometimes women would invest their entire life savings, mortgage their family farms, or form speculative syndicates with outside investors from northern cities, all based on a story scribbled on a piece of aging paper or a crudely hand-drawn map. They would pay substantial fees for exclusive digging rights to a parcel of land, transactions that sometimes sparked decades-long legal battles with skeptical or opportunistic property owners. They would purchase expensive, newfangled equipment like early, bulky metal detectors in the mid-20th century, seeing technology as the key to unlocking the past. The local economy of a small, otherwise forgotten town would briefly boom when a well-funded expedition rolled in, needing supplies, lodging, meals, liquor, and manual labor for digging. The treasure hunt, therefore, created real jobs, sold newspapers and magazines, filled hotel rooms and boarding houses, and sold countless shovels, picks, and buckets. It was a self-sustaining economic microclimate, a small-scale industry that thrived, paradoxically, by revolving around a central, verified absence. This cyclical pattern is mirrored in other great historical treasure myths across cultures and centuries. Consider the centuries-long, empire-draining Spanish search for El Dorado, the mythical city of gold in the Americas, or the modern-day, multi-million-dollar sophisticated salvage operations for sunken Spanish galleons like the Itacha. In each case, the initial capital outlay for ships, crews, advanced sonar equipment, legal permits, and historical research is always justified by the potential, almost fictional, payoff described in historical fragments or maps. Then, the potent psychology of the sunk cost fallacy takes firm hold. The more one invests, not just money, but years of time, professional reputation, family legacy, and profound emotional energy, the harder it becomes to walk away empty-handed. This fallacy guarantees the hunt will be passed down to children, sold to new believers, or reinvented for new generations with new technologies. A cultural historian examining this phenomenon might conclude that the lost cause needed its financial ghost not just as a poetic symbol of resistance, but as a functional, pragmatic economic actor. This phantom could generate real dollars and cents, tourism, book deals, and small business in a region physically and economically devastated by war and struggling under the harsh realities of Reconstruction and a punitive credit system. From the dusty, silent solemnity of the National Archives and the pitted, hopeful dig sites in countless southern fields and forests, we must now pull back the camera to see the full, sweeping shape of this haunting to understand its place in a larger story about value itself. Synthesizing the scattered evidence, the Treasury ledgers, the Union audit reports, the fragmented memoirs, the most likely and intellectually honest conclusion about the material fate of the Confederate Treasury is an anticlimax. The millions, as a single, massive, organized entity of bullion, were a phantom born of hope, exaggeration, and the natural inflation of rumor over time. The tangible assets that survived into the desperate spring of 1865 were dissipated, atomized, in the final chaotic weeks of the Confederacy's existence. They were paid out to desperate men on forgotten roads, stolen by opportunists in the night, spent on last-ditch supplies for a vanishing army, or quietly absorbed into the pockets, chimneys, and garden plots of individuals simply trying to navigate the utter collapse of their world. They entered the bloodstream of the post-war economy coin by coin, dollar by dollar, not as a hidden, monolithic hoard, but as scattered seeds, instantly losing their identity as Confederate treasure and becoming simply money, melted down, spent, and recirculated into the wider economy of a reunited United States. To focus solely on this factual, material dissipation, however, is to completely miss the profound and lasting legacy of the idea. The true treasure, the one with enduring value, was never buried in the Georgia clay or resting in a lake bed. It was printed in newspaper columns, bound in dime store novels, whispered in family stories on porch swings, etched onto fraudulent maps sold at county fairs, and later, broadcast in television documentaries. It was the entire economic and cultural ecosystem generated by its own elusive promise. The Confederate ghost, therefore, is a masterful, real-world lesson in the afterlife of capital. It demonstrates that economic value can undergo a profound alchemical transition from the material to the narrative that a compelling, unresolved story can be more durable, more adaptable, and in the long run more economically potent than the inert metal it describes. This vaporized capital takes on a life of its own, haunting the cultural landscape, inspiring countless songs, novels, and films, and creating a niche tourism industry that thrives on the delicious, profitable maybe. This specific ghost did not stay in the 19th century. It still walks among us today, though it now wears sleek, contemporary disguises that reflect our own anxieties and technologies. We see its clear, unmistakable silhouette in the modern mysteries of vanished and untraceable wealth. Consider the fascinating digital age phenomenon of lost cryptocurrency fortunes. Today, it is estimated that hundreds of thousands of Bitcoin, representing tens of billions of dollars in current value, are trapped in encrypted digital wallets whose passwords or private keys have been permanently forgotten, locked on corrupted hard drives thrown into landfills, or known only to deceased holders. These are the perfect modern-day treasure chests, utterly tangible and verified on the transparent, immutable blockchain ledger, yet completely inaccessible, spawning their own tech-savvy subculture of hunters, hackers running brute force algorithms, and poignant legends about searching for a specific Samsung phone in a Welsh landfill. Or look at the nebulous, shadowy world of dark money in modern political finance. Vast sums, whose original donors and precise pathways are deliberately obscured by a Byzantine network of shell corporations and nonprofit organizations, exist more as an influential rumor of power than a traceable transaction. They are ghosts in the machine of modern democracy, their effects felt in attack ads and policy shifts, but their origins unseen, much like a secret slush fund rumored to have been controlled by a post-war cabinet member. Even the off-the-books slush funds of modern corporations or authoritarian regimes function in this same philosophical realm. This is wealth that is undeniably powerful, whose effects are felt in the real world in the form of silenced dissent or bought influence, but which exists in the shadows of official ledgers, annual reports, and international audits. These are the direct, logical descendants of the Confederate ghost. They are not mere analogies. They are manifestations of the same, unchanging human behaviors in a new context. A deep-seated desire for hidden order and secret scorecards in an overwhelmingly complex and often unfair world. A fascination with the idea of life-changing windfalls just beyond the next line of code or the next financial loophole, and the relentless, sophisticated monetization of speculation, exclusive access, and the hope of discovering the secret that others have missed. The story of the Confederate gold, then, finally transcends a simple historical what happened mystery. It becomes a powerful, multifaceted lens through which to examine our enduring, complex, and often paradoxical relationship with value itself. Money, at its core, is never just metal or paper or digits on a screen. It is a collective agreement, a story we all choose to believe in, backed by the full faith and credit of a government, a system, or a community. It is a shared fiction that works because everyone agrees to participate. When that story collapses, as it did catastrophically and publicly for the Confederacy, the search for a new, more stable story begins immediately. The ghost of the lost gold is that new story. It is a narrative that performed a kind of cultural alchemy, converting the hard, cold failure of a sovereign state into the soft, warm, infinite potential of an unsolved enigma. It allowed a traumatized region to trade, in a symbolic but economically real sense, the worthless asset of a failed state's currency for the infinitely renewable asset of an intriguing mystery. This is not merely collective deception or folly, it is narrative resilience. It is the human mind and society performing one of its oldest and most essential tricks, spinning the straw of defeat, loss, and humiliation into the gold of legend, and then, when that gold proves frustratingly elusive, spinning its very absence into a story that proves, paradoxically, more valuable because it can never be fully spent, only perpetually sought, discussed, and invested in. So, where did the millions in Southern gold go after the Civil War? In a strict, material, forensic sense, they evaporated, spent into the ether of history, dissipated into the pockets and purchases of a shattered society. But in a far more lasting, impactful sense, they went into our collective imagination. They became a foundational American ghost story, one not about specters in a manor, but about value in a void, about wealth that exists most powerfully in the realm of what if. The persistent, century-long search for it is more than a hobby. It is a cultural ritual, a repeated psychodrama. It is a way of continually grappling with the scale of the loss, the trauma of economic and social obliteration, and the haunting, unanswerable question of what was truly spent and what might have been saved, what was real and what was always an illusion. The ghost offers a paradoxical, potent comfort, the possibility that not everything was lost, that something of core, intrinsic value, uncorrupted by defeat, remains, waiting in the darkness for the right person, the right clue, the right moment of rediscovery. In the end, the enduring story of the Confederate ghost holds up a mirror to our most fundamental relationships, with money, with history, and with truth itself. It asks us what we are truly searching for when we chase phantoms of wealth. Whether with a shovel in a Georgia pine forest or with code-breaking algorithms in a server farm. Are we seeking the inert metal or the digital token? Or are we, perhaps, seeking the meaning, the order, the control, and the redemptive hope we have always poured into its legend? The treasure endures not because the gold is out there waiting to be found, but because we have never stopped needing the ghost to be real. And in that enduring, universal need, in the endless retelling and the renewed seeking across generations, we have, in a profound and undeniable way, already found it. The real treasure was the ghost we created all along. It is the story itself passed down and constantly remade that holds the immutable value, teaching us a quiet, enduring lesson about economics and the human spirit, that sometimes the most powerful fortunes, the ones that truly shape economies, cultures, and minds for generations, are the ones that were never there.